My father didn't just miss a birthday or a school ceremony. He missed my wedding. The one day I had quietly hoped, maybe foolishly, that he would finally choose me. I still remember standing at the end of the aisle, my bouquet trembling in my hands, staring at the empty chair reserved for him. No message, no warning, no excuse, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't fade, the kind you carry with you for years. That morning, I told myself something I had never been brave enough to admit before. I was done needing him, done hoping he would become the father I deserved. But everything changed. The morning my hospitality company was valued at $580 million, and suddenly every business channel had my name flashing across their screens. Within hours, my phone lit up with a message I once would have cried to receive. Family dinner, 7 p.m., important discussion. Funny thing is, he couldn't show up for my wedding. But I showed up for that dinner with something he never saw coming. People think broken families are loud, shouting, slamming doors, chaos spilling into every corner of the house. Mine was different. Mine was painfully quiet. My father, Edward Hale, never needed to raise his voice. His absence spoke loudly enough on its own. He moved through our Seattle home like a passing storm, always dressed in tailored suits, always in a hurry, always unreachable. And somehow, everything in our lives revolved around him, even when he wasn't there. My mother followed behind him like a shadow wrapped in elegance. "Honey, your father is under a lot of pressure," she would whisper whenever he missed another recital, another ceremony, another milestone. "Be understanding." Understanding, that was the word used to excuse every disappointment, every forgotten promise, every moment I learned not to expect too much. My older brother Ryan was the opposite of invisible. He was effortless, charming, confident, naturally magnetic. The son my father proudly introduced to investors. The son whose achievements were displayed like trophies, while I lingered in the background, quiet, observant, replaceable. Once when I was 12, I gathered enough courage to ask the question that had lived inside me for years. "Dad, why don't you ever come to my events?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Because Claire, I'm building a future for this family. You should be grateful." Grateful? For what, exactly? For learning how it felt to be overlooked. That was the moment I began to understand something most children never should. In our house, love came with conditions. And somehow, I never seemed to meet them. So I adapted. Like many forgotten daughters do, I built a world inside myself, one where I imagined that someday I would accomplish something big enough, loud enough, important enough to finally earn a place in his line of sight. I just didn't know that to be seen, I would have to become someone entirely different. People love to say your wedding day is the happiest day of your life. Mine started that way until it didn't. I stood in the bridal suite, veil pinned perfectly into place, lipstick untouched, hands trembling just enough to betray the calm I was pretending to feel. Every few minutes I checked my phone, not for my friends, not for the florist, not for last-minute chaos, just for one message, one simple sentence. "I'm on my way." 10 minutes before the ceremony, my screen finally lit up. My heart jumped, then dropped. "Dad can't make it." Important meeting? No apology, no explanation, just another transactional message, as if missing his daughter's wedding were no different than rescheduling a conference call. My throat tightened, but I smiled for the sake of the bridesmaids. I had learned long ago how to hold pain quietly. When the doors opened and the music swelled, I walked down the aisle alone. Guests probably assumed it was intentional, a modern gesture of independence. Only I knew the truth. It wasn't empowerment, it was abandonment. At the altar, Daniel gently took my hands. "You don't have to pretend you're okay," he whispered. And that was the hardest part. I had been pretending for so long, I wasn't sure I remembered how to stop. Later that night, after the music faded and the celebration softened into memory, Daniel and I sat on the balcony overlooking the sleeping city. "He could have tried," I murmured. Daniel squeezed my hand. "One day he'll regret it." I stared at the empty streets below. I'm not waiting for that day. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, more like a quiet unraveling. For the first time, I allowed myself to accept a truth I had avoided my entire life. If my father couldn't show up for my wedding, he would never show up for anything that didn't serve him. What I didn't know then was that he would eventually show up, just not as a father, as a man who needed something. And by then, I was no longer the daughter still hoping to be chosen. After the wedding, something inside me didn't shatter. It hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. If my father's absence had taught me anything, it was this: waiting for someone's approval is the slowest form of self-destruction. So I stopped waiting. Instead, I poured every ounce of myself into the one thing that had always made sense to me: hospitality. Not the outdated roadside motels my father once glorified, but modern spaces. Intentional spaces. Places where people felt noticed, welcomed, valued, everything I had spent my childhood wishing for. My first property was a disaster, a worn-down lodge just outside Portland, the kind travelers avoided unless they had no other choice. There was mold hiding beneath the wallpaper, carpets that carried the permanent scent of damp winters, flickering hallway lights that buzzed louder than the reception phone. The bank manager studied me carefully the day I signed the papers. "You're sure about this?" he asked. A polite way of saying you're too young, too inexperienced, too optimistic, maybe even too female. But I simply nodded. Because what I didn't tell him was this: failure was never an option for me. Not when my entire life I had been underestimated. Not when a quiet part of me still wanted to prove I was never the fragile daughter my father assumed I was. So I worked. Relentlessly. I scrubbed bathroom floors at midnight. Wrote marketing plans at sunrise. Handled bookings, complaints, repairs, vendor negotiations, often all before lunch. Most weeks hiring help wasn't financially possible, so I became the help. There were nights I slept behind the front desk wrapped in a blanket, telling myself it was temporary, even when exhaustion made everything feel permanent. One winter storm knocked out power across the entire property. For 4 freezing hours, I guided guests through dark hallways with nothing but a flashlight, apologizing for circumstances I couldn't control. At one point, I locked myself inside the boiler room and cried. Just once. Quietly. Then I wiped my face and went back to work. Because no one was coming to rescue me, and for the first time in my life, that realization didn't scare me. It strengthened me. By year 3, the lodge had transformed. Weekend bookings filled months in advance. Travel blogs started mentioning us. Guests returned not just for the rooms, but for how the place made them feel. Seen. By year 5, I expanded to 2 more locations. Minimalist retreats surrounded by nature, eco-conscious design, warm lighting, soft textures, spaces built with intention instead of ego. Investors began calling, journalists requested interviews. Competitors quietly studied my model. But my father, not a word, not a message, not even a distant congratulations passed through family channels. It was like constructing a skyscraper in the middle of a desert, tall enough for the world to notice. Invisible to the one person I once hoped would. Then came the morning everything changed. My CFO burst into my office without knocking, something she never did. Her eyes were wide. "Hannah," she said, slightly breathless. "The valuation just came in." My pulse quickened. "Well," I asked. She broke into a grin. 580 million. For a moment, the world went completely still, not because I was shocked, but because the first image that surfaced in my mind wasn't a headline, wasn't the number, wasn't even the success. It was that empty chair at my wedding. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to cry when I thought about it. I felt powerful. What I didn't know yet was that miles away, my father was staring at the same headline, and suddenly remembering he had a daughter. The office buzzed all morning, phones ringing, emails flooding in, congratulations stacking faster than I could read them. Everything blurred into a surreal hum of achievement. But the moment that stayed with me was much quieter. I was standing alone near the windows, watching sunlight spill across the skyline when my phone vibrated again. I assumed it was another reporter, another investor, another partner. It wasn't Dad. I stared at his name longer than I'd like to admit. He hadn't texted me in nearly 3 years. With slightly trembling hands, I opened the message. "Family dinner, 7 p.m., important discussion." No congratulations, no pride. Not even my name. It read like a corporate summons. Daniel walked in carrying 2 coffees and immediately noticed my expression. "What happened?" I showed him the screen. His jaw tightened. He didn't reach out at 10 million or 50 or even 200. But 580? I swallowed slowly. "He wants something." "Then don't go," Daniel said gently, but the truth was I had to go, not for him, for me. I needed to see the look on his face when he realized something had fundamentally changed. I no longer needed his approval. Later that afternoon, Lena, my CFO, was waiting in my driveway when I arrived home. She held up a thick folder. "You should read this before tonight." A quiet unease settled in my stomach as I flipped through the pages. Loan defaults, contractor lawsuits, foreclosure warnings, liquidity reports drowning in red. All tied to my father's real estate empire. "Your father's business is collapsing," she said carefully. "Badly." The pieces clicked into place instantly. "So that's why he texted," I whispered. "Not to reconnect, but to use me." Lena hesitated. "There's more. The lenders are nervous. They're willing to sell the entire debt portfolio below market value." A slow calm spread through me, not anger, not even satisfaction. "Just clarity, buy it," I said, her eyebrows lifted. "All of it?" "Yes, every loan, every liability, every inch of the empire he once valued more than his own daughter. Because if my father wanted a family meeting, he was about to meet a version of me he had never imagined." Lena didn't question me again. That's why she was my CFO. By midnight, we were surrounded by contracts, digital signatures, financial statements, and coffee that tasted more like determination than caffeine. Each document represented another piece of my father's shrinking kingdom. Hotels, commercial land, investment properties, assets he once spoke about with near religious pride. At 2:13 a.m., Lena finally looked up from her laptop. "Hannah, once this clears, you won't just be helping your father." She paused. "You'll own everything he built." I inhaled slowly. "I'm not doing this to hurt him," I said. "I'm doing it because he expects me to save him without ever truly seeing me." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "You're not buying revenge," she said quietly. "You're buying control." By sunrise, the lenders had signed. By noon, legal confirmed the transfer. And by late afternoon, my father's empire no longer belonged to him. It belonged to me. I expected to feel victorious, electric, triumphant. Instead, I felt calm, the kind of calm that arrives just before a storm breaks. That evening, I stood in my closet longer than necessary. Not searching for confidence, but acknowledging it, I chose a fitted black dress. Structured, elegant, unapologetic, heels that forced my shoulders back and my chin higher. This wasn't about looking powerful. It was about no longer shrinking. Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching me fasten my earrings. "You're nervous," he said softly. "I'm not nervous about seeing him," I replied. I met his eyes in the mirror. "I'm nervous I might still care." He stepped closer. "Hannah, caring doesn't make you weak." He squeezed my hand. "Letting someone keep hurting you does." I exhaled slowly. Tonight wasn't about pleasing my father. Tonight was about facing him with a truth he had avoided my entire life. The drive to the country club felt strangely quiet. Streetlights stretched into golden lines across the windshield as memories surfaced uninvited. "Focus on something simpler, Hannah. You're not cut out for real business. This industry is too big for you." For years, I carried those words like invisible weights. But the folder resting inside my bag, the one granting me full legal authority over his empire, reminded me of something important. I didn't need to prove him wrong anymore. I already had. When I pulled into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. "Mom, please be kind to your father tonight. He's under a lot of stress." Even now, they expected me to bend, to soften, to make things comfortable for the man who never protected my heart. I locked my phone and slipped it into my purse. Not tonight. Tonight I stood taller than I ever had, because I wasn't the ignored daughter anymore. I wasn't the abandoned bride. I wasn't the invisible child chasing approval. I was the woman holding the future he was about to beg for, and he had absolutely no idea. The private dining room glowed with warm amber light. Too elegant, too peaceful for what was about to unfold. The moment I pushed the door open, 4 faces turned toward me. Dad, Mom, my brother Ethan, Uncle Mark, crystal glasses, expensive wine, the illusion of stability. My father leaned back in his chair like a CEO preparing to correct an underperforming employee. "You're late," he said flatly. I closed the door behind me. "No," I replied calmly. "I arrived exactly when I meant to." Mom shifted uncomfortably. Dad's eyebrow twitched. "Sit," he ordered. "We have things to discuss." I remained standing. "I already know why I'm here." Ethan let out a short laugh. "Great. Then let's skip the dramatics." Dad folded his hands. Our business has encountered temporary challenges. Temporary, an interesting word for financial collapse. Your company is doing exceptionally well, he continued smoothly. You have the means to help your family. Help your family, not I'm proud of you, not you've done something extraordinary, just expectation, entitlement. I stepped closer to the table. So this dinner is about money. Mom clasped her hands nervously. Hannah, sweetheart, your father is failing, I interrupted gently. Financially, operationally, completely. Dad's expression hardened. We hit a rough patch. With your support, we can stabilize until... You mean the properties you haven't paid contractors on for months? Silence cracked across the table. The loans already scheduled for liquidation? I added. Ethan straightened. How do you know about that? I placed my bag on the chair and pulled out the folder. Because, I said, sliding it toward them, I now own every dollar of your debt. Dad blinked. Once. Twice. What did you just say? Ethan flipped the folder open, scanning the documents. The color drained from his face. Dad, his voice dropped to a whisper. This is real, she bought everything. Mom's hand flew to her chest. Oh my God, Hannah, why would you do this? Dad slammed both palms onto the table. How dare you interfere in my business? I didn't flinch. You asked me for help, I said evenly. This is help. This is control, he roared. You're trying to take what's mine, I held his gaze. I didn't take it, you lost it, I just arrived first. Ethan shot to his feet. You're unbelievable, Dad built everything we have. Correction, I said calmly, I built mine. Alone, Mom was crying now. Please, your father is under so much pressure. Something inside me finally snapped. He didn't even come to my wedding. The room went dead silent. Dad's jaw tightened. That was unfortunate timing. No, I said sharply. Traffic is unfortunate timing. Missing your daughter's wedding is a choice. He opened his mouth, but I continued. You ignored me for years until I became valuable. That's not true, Mom whispered weakly. Then why, I asked quietly, did he only text me after seeing the $580 million headline? Why not when I opened my first hotel, or my second, or when I walked down the aisle alone? Dad's voice dropped, cold and brittle. You owe this family. My hand hit the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. I owe you nothing? They froze. My voice trembled, but it did not break. I begged for your love for years. I worked myself into the ground trying to become someone you'd finally show up for. And when I succeeded, you didn't congratulate me, you summoned me. Dad stared at me. So what now? You destroy everything I built? I reached into the folder and placed a single envelope in front of him. I'm offering you a path forward, 30 days, vacate all properties. After that, my company assumes full control. Mom sobbed openly. Please don't do this. Dad looked at me, truly looked, perhaps for the first time in his life. You're no daughter of mine, he whispered, and strangely, the words didn't wound me, they freed me. I straightened. No, I said quietly. You made sure of that years ago. I picked up my purse, turned my back on the table, and walked toward the door. Behind me, chairs scraped. Voices rose, someone shouted my name, but none of it reached me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away hoping they'd stop me. I was walking away knowing they couldn't. The night air hit my skin the moment I stepped outside the country club. Cool, open, free. For a few seconds, I just stood there on the stone steps, breathing deeper than I had in years, like someone who had finally surfaced after being held underwater far too long. Behind those heavy doors, voices were rising. My father's anger, my mother's crying, Ethan trying to salvage whatever illusion of control they thought they still had. But for the first time, none of it reached me. Daniel was waiting by the car. The second he saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He simply opened the passenger door and took my hand as I sat down. You okay? He asked gently. I stared out at the waterfront lights flickering across the dark water. I thought it would hurt more, I admitted. Does it? He asked. I shook my head slowly. It feels like I just walked out of a prison, one I didn't even realize I was serving a life sentence in. He squeezed my hand. And we drove home in silence, not the painful kind I grew up with, but the peaceful kind. The next morning, sunlight poured into my kitchen, warm and quiet. The folder from the night before sat on the marble counter. Before, something like that would have filled me with dread. Now it looked like freedom bound in paper. At exactly 9 a.m., Lena called. The transition is complete, she said. You are officially in control of all assets. I closed my eyes. Not overwhelmed by power, but by finality. Thank you, I whispered. She hesitated. Hannah, are you okay? I surprised both of us by smiling. I said softly, I've never been better. The following weeks moved quickly, but differently than before. Lighter, steadier, healthier. I toured each of my father's failing properties with my executive team. Where he once saw dominance, I saw neglect. Where his spaces felt cold and transactional, I envisioned warmth, healing, intention. This one becomes a wellness retreat, I told the designers during one walkthrough. Natural light, quiet rooms, spaces where people can breathe again. As I spoke, I realized something almost poetic. I wasn't just rebuilding his empire, I was transforming it into something he never understood. Places where people felt seen, something I had spent my entire childhood wishing for. One afternoon, while standing in the glass lobby of what would soon become our flagship retreat, I caught my reflection. Black blazer, hair pulled back, eyes steady, no hesitation, no shrinking. I didn't look like the girl who cried alone in a bridal suite waiting for a father who never came. I didn't look like the daughter who begged for conditional love. I looked whole. My family didn't contact me, not once. But the silence felt different now. It didn't sting. It simply existed like background noise from a life I no longer lived. Ethan posted vague quotes online about betrayal. Mom left 2 voicemails filled with tears but never an apology. Dad, nothing. His pride was louder than any words. And yet for the first time, their reactions didn't reopen old wounds. Because I finally understood something important. Walking away isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's self-rescue. It's choosing to give yourself what others never could. Permission to live a life not shaped by their absence but by your presence. People love to believe success heals everything. That once your name appears in headlines beside a number like $580 million, every childhood wound magically disappears. But healing doesn't work like that. Money doesn't rewrite memories. Success doesn't replace love. What changed my life wasn't the valuation. It wasn't acquiring the debt. It wasn't even that explosive dinner. The real turning point was the moment I walked out of that country club without looking back. Not wishing things had been different. Not waiting for someone to run after me, just accepting the truth, and feeling lighter because of it. A few weeks later, Daniel joined me at one of the newly renovated properties. Soft piano music drifted through the lobby. Sunlight filtered across warm oak floors. Guests laughed quietly over tea. The entire space felt calm, like a deep exhale. Looks like a fresh start, Daniel said, slipping his hand into mine. I nodded. It is, I whispered. But not just for the business, for me. Because after chasing approval my entire life, I finally understood something that changed everything. Love that must be earned is not love. Family that only appears when you're useful is not family, and approval that comes with conditions is not approval at all. I didn't need to fix my father. I didn't need to win him over. And I didn't need him to finally see me. I needed to see myself. So if you ask me when my life truly changed, it wasn't the day my company reached $580 million. It wasn't the day I took control of his empire. It was the moment I realized I wasn't broken for wanting a father who could never be one. I was human. And the day I chose myself over the people who only chose my usefulness, I didn't lose a family. I reclaimed my life, and that was worth far more than $580 million.